At the end of last week's episode, I said this week was the one that changes how you understand everything else. I meant it. Here is something that almost nobody tells leaders, and that I think is one of the most practical, useful pieces of information you can have about your own behavior at work. You are not rational in difficult conversations, not because you lack intelligence or self-control, but because your brain is not designed to be rational under threat. It is designed to survive. And the conditions of most modern workplaces are, from your nervous system's perspective, threat conditions. That is not a criticism, it's a biology lesson. And once you understand it, you start to see your own behavior and the behavior of the people around you very differently. That's what today's about. Welcome back to the Unapologetic Edge. I'm Philippa Scott, psychosocial safety specialist and nervous system informed leadership consultant. The last 3 episodes were around building the compliance case, what the legislation requires, what the 14 psychosocial hazards are, what the categories are, and why wellness programs don't discharge the obligation. From here, the season shifts. We're going into the science, not because the science is more important than the compliance, but because understanding what is actually happening in the human body under workplace stress changes everything about how you manage it. So let's start with the threat response. Your nervous system has one primary job: keep you alive. To do that job, it is constantly scanning your environment for signals of safety or danger. This scanning is automatic, unconscious, and extraordinarily fast. It happens before your conscious mind has processed what's in front of you. When the nervous system detects a threat, it activates. Heart rate increases, your stress hormones are released, blood flow shifts towards the large muscle groups you need to run or fight. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for rational thinking, planning, and perspective taking, goes partially offline. And that's a brilliant engineering for a physical threat. If you need to outrun a predator, you do not need nuanced thinking. You need speed and reaction time. It is significantly less brilliant engineering for a performance review or a budget negotiation or a conversation with a team member who keeps missing deadlines, because in those situations, the prefrontal cortex going offline is precisely what you can least afford. And yet, this is exactly what happens. The nervous system does not distinguish between a predator and a difficult conversation. Both register as threat. Both activate the same response. The difference is that in the modern workplace, the threat response gets triggered dozens of times a day in conditions that require the highest order cognitive functions to navigate. And most people have no framework for understanding what's happening in their own body. When your leadership capacity peaks when your nervous system feels state, it degrades in precise proportion to the degree of threat your nervous system is detecting. That's not a character, that's physiology. Let me make this concrete, because the abstract version is interesting, but the applied version is where the value is. That you're in a meeting, someone raises something that feels like a challenge to a decision you made. Before you have consciously registered what they've said, your nervous system has clocked it as a threat. Not necessarily a physical threat, but a status one, a competence threat, a control threat. These are all processed by the same threat detection system. Your heart rate has already increased. Your thinking has already narrowed. You are already less able to hear what the person is actually saying, less able to consider their perspective, less able to respond with nuance. The response that comes out of you in that moment is not your considered response. It is your threat response. And it may look like defensiveness. It may look like dismissal. It may look like counterattack. It may look like a kind of flat, controlled withdrawal that shuts the conversation down. None of these responses are serving you, and they are not serving the person across from you, and they're not serving the organization. Now, multiply that by the number of difficult conversations a senior leader has in a week, and by the number of people in the organization who are having their own threat response in interactions with their managers, and in the number of days, months, and years this pattern has been running. That's not a leadership development problem. That's a nervous system problem at scale, and it is a named psychosocial hazard under workplace health and safety legislation in Australia. Specifically, it falls across job demands, poor support, low job control, and the conditions that generate poor workplace relationships. The nervous system in threat is not producing psychological safety. It is producing the conditions for psychological harm. Here is where I need to be precise about language, because this territory gets co-opted very easily into the wellness conversation I told you about in the last episode, and it's in the wrong conversation. Nervous system regulation does not mean staying calm. It does not mean emotional suppression. It does not mean being unaffected by difficult things. It means having the capacity to move through activation and return to a state where your higher order cognitive functions are available. That's it. The ability to come back online. And here is why that matters for leadership specifically. A regulated nervous system does not produce better performance reviews. It produces better listening. It produces better questions. It produces the capacity to hold complexity without collapsing into a simple narrative. It produces psychological safety for the people in the room because regulated nervous systems are genuinely safer to be around than activated ones. And a team whose manager has a regulated nervous system has a fundamentally different experience at work than a team whose manager is chronically activated. This is the mechanism underneath almost every psychosocial hazard in your organization. Not the content of what's happening, but the nervous system state in which it's being managed. Poor change management is usually not poor planning. It's leaders who are themselves activated by the uncertainty of the change, communicating that activation to their teams and calling it communication. Poor organizational justice is usually not malicious unfairness. It is decisions being made by people in threat states who are less able to consider impact, less able to consult, and less able to explain their reasoning in ways that feel fair. Poor workplace relationships are usually not personal conflicts. They are two nervous system states in habitual threat response to each other, playing out the same dynamic repeatedly because neither person has the framework or the support to interrupt it. You cannot manage psychosocial hazard at scale without understanding this. You can implement processes, you can write policies, you can run training, and all of that will land on top of a nervous system problem that none of it addresses. Next week, we're going to talk about the high performer who is about to quit, and specifically about why the people most at risk of significant burnout are the ones least likely to signal it and what that means for how you manage your most capable people. But before we get there, I want to leave you with one question for this week. Think about the last difficult conversation you had at work, not the content of it, the state you were in when you were having it. Were you regulated, genuinely present, able to think clearly and hear the other person? Or were you activated, narrowed, running a threat response in a suit? There is no judgment in that question. There's just information. 2 things before you go. If this episode has made you want to understand your own nervous system patterns more specifically, a strategy call is a good place to start. We can map out what's actually happening and what a different approach looks like in your specific context. The link is in the show notes. And the burnout audit is also in the show notes. It covers 7 dimensions of psychosocial load, and it will show you where your own nervous system is under the most pressure right now. It's free, it's 5 minutes. I'm Philippa Scott. This is Unapologetic Edge. I'll see you next week.